If we imagine a trial, then we can imagine a courtroom with a judge, a defense lawyer, a client, and a prosecutor, another lawyer, with other people watching this trial. Now, what really is the purpose of a trial? The purpose of a trial is to unveil the truth of what happened in a moment in time or a period of time. It's very interesting that Jesus doesn't really get a proper trial in today's gospel. And yet, what's really happening is we're learning the truth of other people that Jesus faces on his way to the cross. And we also face the truth of who God is. And so in the first encounter, we have these police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and we also have Roman soldiers and Judas coming out to get Jesus. Now, the truth is they don't truly understand who Jesus is. They don't understand that Jesus is going to freely give his life for the benefit of humanity. And so they come with torches. And this is close to Passover, so the moon would have been full, so there's really no need for torches. But they believe they're going to have to search high and low to find Jesus. The other thing is they bring weapons. I mean, why would you bring weapons against Jesus? I guess he did get angry once in the temple. But they bring weapons because they expect that Jesus is going to rise up and is going to overthrow them, overthrow the Romans. But also Judas wouldn't accept the truth that Jesus was continuously offering life and love. And so Peter also doesn't understand the situation because he pulls out a sword and he chops off the ear of the high priest's slave. Now, this is not the way that Jesus is going to deal with this situation. And we get to know that Peter is kind of like half following Jesus. He's following Jesus from the distance. He and another anonymous disciple are following Jesus as Jesus goes to Ananias' place and Caiaphas, the high priest's place. But he denies Jesus, so we know he's only half following Jesus. So that reveals the truth of Peter. And so Jesus before Caiaphas, what's very interesting is these chief priests, the high priest Caiaphas, the Pharisees, they all followed the law like to a T, and they were so strict. I mean, this is partly why they're at odds with Jesus, because Jesus couldn't practice the Sabbath law. And yet they were not to hold any sort of trial in the evening or at night. And what are they doing? They're holding a trial, or a so-called trial, in the night. So they're breaking the law. And yet they, like hypocrites, they kind of dismiss this. And they want Jesus to die because it's better that he die than a whole bunch of people end up following him, and they believe that he's following them, or they're following falsehood, and that's not good. So they take him to Pilate. Now they know Pilate. They know the truth of Pilate. Pilate was insensitive and hostile, and Pilate had put many people to death with an improper trial or no trial at all. They also know the reality that Pilate and the emperor are kind of at odds with each other. Things are not so rosy-cozy between these two characters. And so obviously the accusation of blasphemy means nothing to Pilate. Oh, you claim to be God? I don't even believe in God, is what Pilate would have said. So that means nothing to Pilate. And so the accusation is Jesus is the King of the Jews. And if Jesus is the King of the Jews, then he's going to lead an army against the Romans, and he's going to take them on. Now, of course, this is a major concern for Pilate, and yet he doesn't accept this as truth. He sees that Jesus is not somebody like this. Historically, Jesus has no problem with the Romans. And Jesus doesn't look like somebody who's going to violently lead an army against the Romans. And so Pilate's conscience is saying the truth is this guy is no threat to me. But the crowd kind of pokes at Pilate and, and says, we have no king but the emperor. Now, Pilate's no silly guy. I mean, he figures this out. These guys have no loyalty to the emperor. They're just saying that because they want to see Jesus sentenced to death. But because the emperor, Tiberius at the time, didn't like the idea of these different groups rising up against the Romans, and Pilate doesn't have the greatest of relationships with the emperor, he figures, I better put this Jesus guy to death. It's more about his own relationship with the emperor and his own insecurity that leads Jesus to death. Now, when Jesus is on the cross, he says a very interesting thing. He says, "It is finished." Now, does this mean that it's finished, like I'm going to die soon? No, it means that I have come to do everything I was set to do. And Jesus was set to reveal the truth of who God is. When we look to the person of Jesus, especially when he's on the cross or making his way to the cross, we see somebody who doesn't fight for his rights. Hey, I didn't get a proper trial. I deserve a proper trial. He didn't say, "Oh, don't look at me like these two criminals beside me. I'm innocent. I'm not a criminal." He doesn't do anything. He absorbs all that. And this is to show how loving God is. It's also to show us how forgiving God is. It's also to show us that, notice how Jesus makes sure that John and Mary will care for each other. Even in great suffering, Jesus will still care for people. And this reveals to us that God does care for us when we're suffering, especially suffering greatly, because John and Mary would have been suffering. And Jesus lived a life of poverty. It shows that God cares for the poor. And so as we're mindful of the crucified Christ, may we give thanks that God revealed the truth of who God is in the person of Jesus. And may we celebrate that today truly is Good Friday.